I love it when you come to a part of the scriptures that stop you in your tracks, that make you go, did that just say what I thought it said? And you go back to the beginning and you read it through again and you get to the end and you go, I think it did say what I said. I just want to make sure, and you go back to the start again. And that has been Jeremiah 17 for me. I continue to read it over and over again because the metaphor and the picture and the promise that God gives us in the midst of these few sentences is incredible. It's incredible for you and I as we do our gut level best to navigate life, to get through our everyday, to get through our job, to get through our families, to get through our neighborhood events, all of those kinds of things. And these are the words that are given to us in Jeremiah chapter 17. But blessed are those who trust in the Lord and have made the Lord their hope and confidence. Last week we talked about what does it mean to be blessed, what's the definition of that, and we discussed how the definition is less about the things that we have and it's more about whose we are. It's this identity that we're blessed because we are His. But as I was reading through it again, it dawned on me that there's an incredible, huge kind of wish it wasn't their word stuck in the middle of this passage. It's a word that each one of us struggles with on some level, especially when it comes to a God that we can't see, that we can't touch, that we can't necessarily feel all of the time. It's this word, trust. This blessed life, this thriving life that we've been talking about, do you see this, hinges on that one word. Blessed are those who trust in the Lord. If you're anything like me, you go, that sounds really good up here, but when it comes to living that out every day, that's really a struggle for me. I struggle to trust people, let alone trust a God. And as I was wrestling with this and I was thinking about this, it took me back to my kids. It kind of always comes back to my kids for me. I say this often, but I really believe that God gave me children just so I could learn more about Him. And it reminded me of a couple of our trips to Disney World. We have a problem. We go there often. But my kids' favorite attraction at Disney World, now there are a lot of those. There are 4 different parks and hundreds of attractions in all of those parks. But if you put them all together and you lined them up, my kids, hands down, I can guarantee you this would say that their favorite part of Disney World is the swimming pool. They won't go to college and I'll never retire so we can swim in Orlando, Florida. That's what that boils down to. But my kids' favorite activity at the swimming pool are cannonballs. They love to do cannonballs, and it's been something that they do from a very young age, and they will step up to the edge with their toes hanging off the side of the pool, and they will jump as far and as high as they possibly can. But you know, it's not always been that way. When they were really small, they would tentatively walk up to the edge, and they would stand there and they would say, "Are you ready, Dad?" And I'd say, "I'm ready." "Are you sure you're ready?" "I'm ready." "You can jump. It's okay. I'm gonna catch you. I'll be right here. Don't worry." "Okay, you're too far. Come closer. Come closer." And pretty soon I'd have to be pretty much right under their feet. And they would jump. And they would jump and they would jump and they would jump. And then about a half day later, they'd step up to the edge and they'd say, "Okay, you go out a little further." And then they'd jump and then they'd jump. And now it's to the point where, "Dad, you can go on the other side of the pool. I'm gonna get there." They just trust me. Even though I don't catch them above water, I catch them underneath. I let them hit, and I just reach my hand down and grab their arm to make sure that they come back up. Even before they knew how to swim. And here's what's incredible. Not only did they not know how to swim when we do these things, they didn't figure out the physics of the whole equation either. They didn't think about, has my dad been working out recently and can handle my body weight? They didn't calculate the aerodynamics of their body flying through the air or into the water or any of that. They just trusted that their dad was going to catch them no matter what. And as he proved to be trustworthy, they gave him a little more. Further and further, they were willing to jump. Here's what's interesting about trust. Trust is really belief. You could almost use those interchangeably when it comes to our faith journey, that when we say we trust God, it means we believe God. We believe in God. And belief is really this acceptance. It's an acceptance of a truth before we even experience it. Have you ever thought about that? When my kids are at the pool, they have to trust me before they jump for the very first time. Here's what's crazy about this dynamic that's going to trouble you probably the rest of your week, because it's been troubling me. The reality is experience validates acceptance. So when it comes to trust and belief, our experience usually comes second, and it will fill in the gap. It will make us feel like that was a right way to trust or a right person to trust, and my belief was well-founded. But the experience always comes second, and here's the hard part, is that acceptance is what initiates the experience. There are moments, time after time again in our life, where we have to trust, we have to believe, we have to accept something as true before it actually gets backed up. That's hard for us as adults, isn't it? Because we want to make sure that whatever we're jumping towards is going to catch us. We want to make sure that whatever we're investing in is going to have a good return. We want to make sure that whatever danger we're jumping into has a safety net. But when it comes to any relationship, when it comes to any great experience, when it comes to our relationship with God, we have to do some trusting first, even before we understand. That's kind of what I want to drive us towards today. We're going to come back to this idea over and over again. In fact, if you ignore everything else I say this morning, but pay attention to this next phrase, I'll be okay. I feel like we'll have won the day. What I want to do is call us to live hand in hand, even when you don't understand. Live hand in hand, even when you don't understand. And if I would have really been thinking, I would have made the first hand a lowercase h and the second hand an uppercase h. What I'm going to challenge you to do, because it's what I'm challenging myself to do today, is to live hand in hand with God, trusting Him, even before I'm sure it's going to work out. Even before I'm sure it's all going to be advantageous for me. I'm just going to trust Him. I'm going to step up to the edge and jump. Easier said than done. Luckily, Jesus taught on this over and over again, and He used my favorite object lesson. Kids. If you go to the Gospel of Mark, and you go to chapter 10, you come upon one of my favorite moments in all of the ministry of Jesus. I think it's one of the most tender, soft, wonderful pictures of who He is that we get. I come back to it over and over and over again because Jesus has a moment with some children, and the adults try to get in the way. Mark chapter 10 reads like this: One day, some parents brought their children to Jesus so He could touch and bless them. But the disciples scolded the parents for bothering Him. Let's talk about children for just a minute in this day and age, in the first century. Children were only known and therefore valued by the man that they came from. And I'm using those words very specifically because we talk about this all the time. Women in that day and age were not held in the same light and value and respect that they are today. And kids were even less so. You only mattered if your dad mattered. You were only known if your dad was known. You were unimportant. In fact, childhood was viewed as a nuisance. They thought of childhood as this unavoidable, necessary waiting room to get into adulthood. Now, adulthood, because they hated childhood so much, was 13. If you were 13, you were considered a grown person. That's hard for me to imagine, but it points to kids just didn't carry any value for people in those days. This idea that we need to be soft and tender and caring and nurturing for our kids is not a first century idea. It's a very 21st century idea, but back then, that was not how it was viewed. So what we see is the disciples buying into societal norms and not Jesus' norms, and I'll show you that in a minute. But the other part of this equation is not only are kids not valued, but Jesus, well, he's kind of a big deal at this point. He's walking around and people from all over the place are coming to see him and coming to listen to him, and they want to be healed by him. And Jesus, not because Jesus wanted it, but because people are people, Jesus was kind of a rock star. And people began to refer to him as rabbi. Now here's what religion was like in that day and age. It was exclusive and it was elitist. And so if you were considered a rabbi, you were way up here, and everybody else was way down here, and all of their kids were way down there. You were important. You were not to be bothered. You didn't get approached out of the blue like this. You needed an appointment. You needed all this practice of respect and all the right words and all that jazz. Kids were not allowed to just run up to a rabbi. So you can understand, because I go, man, the disciples are so mean. But they're just living how they were wired or grown to live in that day and age. I think it's interesting that they actually yell at the parents, which is kind of cool. They're not yelling at the kids. They're just telling these people they don't understand who Jesus is. When you factor all of that in, Jesus is a big deal, kids are not a big deal. If you're like me, I go, well, why would Jesus use children as this object lesson? Why would Jesus point to them and say some of the gigantic things he's about to say about kids? I think it's for a few simple reasons, things that you've probably experienced with kids that you've been around, but I do on a regular basis with mine. For starters, children take people at their word. Kids are very trusting. It's interesting how that is. And the younger they are, the more trusting they are. One of the jokes at my house all the time when the kids would ask, what's for dinner? I'd always say frog legs, because that's what my dad said to me. And I remember being a little kid and thinking, we're actually going to have frog legs. Now, I don't mean to offend any of you that love frog legs, but that is not what I would want for dinner. Now, over time, I realized what a joke was, and I started to be very suspicious when my dad, but you can see how that plays out. My kids believe me too. The other day, they asked to go to the park. Now, in case you didn't notice, we've been struck with a plague of mosquitoes lately. I swear they hover outside my door waiting. Here he comes, dinner's on. That sweet Swedish blood, they love it. But here's the deal. Kids go, we want to go to the park, Dad, can we go to the park? And in my head, I'm going, I won't make it home. Because the mosquitoes are so bad. So this is what I said, this is terrible. And if you see my kids today, don't tell them. I said the park was closed. I said the mosquitoes are too bad, so they closed the park. This is my confession. And you know what? They said, oh, okay. Let's do something else. They believed me. They took me at my word, but why? Because they trust me. They shouldn't, but they do. They trust me. Kids take people at their word. What's interesting about children, too, is that they give trust before it's earned. They're too young for anybody to have earned their trust. They just give it blindly. They give it happily. Again, they step to the edge of the pool or they listen to their father tell them an untruth, and they just go, okay, here I am. I trust you. What's interesting about kids, too, is they have faith without assumptions. We have faith with assumptions. So, in other words, I'll have faith as long as these things work out the way that I want them to. Then I'll put my faith in something. But not kids. Kids constantly, again, it's like the trust thing. I'll just give it to you. And I'm open to however this works out. I'm open to what experience results from the acceptance, but I'll start with the acceptance. I'll believe. And so, when Jesus is given the opportunity with these kids, he delivers such a cool message. This is what he says. When Jesus saw what was happening, he was angry with his disciples. I always pause there because it's like, what would it have been like to have Jesus mad at you? Some of us are like, I live every day with Jesus mad at me, but like, he could like get on you a little bit. Peter was always used to that. But Jesus said to them when he was mad, let the children come to me. Don't stop them. For the kingdom of God belongs to those who are like these children. Then he goes on to say, I tell you the truth, anyone who doesn't receive the kingdom of God like a child will never enter it. And I love this because what Jesus doesn't say is grow up. What Jesus says is a little more Peter Pan than that. Never grow up. You need to be like a child because this inheritance we talked about last week, what Jesus refers to as the kingdom here, this promise of a future, this thing that we have a hope in, this thing that makes us feel secure no matter what's going on today, that blessing that we have. He says that kingdom comes with a prerequisite. And that prerequisite, I can't say that word. I'm going to stop saying that word. That thing you got to have before you inherit it is a childlike faith. And we will talk about this all the time. So just Christians in the room, you and me for a minute. We will talk about this all the time, and we will challenge our unbelieving friends to have a childlike faith, and then we go about our everyday with a very adult-like faith. And we feel frustrated, and we feel scared, and we feel unsure, and we feel like we need to take things on ourselves and lean into our human strength. And human strength is the bush life that we talked about the very first week of this series. Jesus says, you want to thrive in life? Live like a kid. Trust me like a kid. I think he lands here because this idea that kids can receive, this word, receive the kingdom, I'm perplexed by that. Receive the kingdom, because you and I would automatically think, earn the kingdom. Jesus says, no, you need to receive the kingdom like a child. And I think he uses this word because you've seen the stark difference between a kid and an adult at Christmas time. By the way, there's 97 days until Christmas. It's coming. Here's the thing. Kids and adults are on opposite ends of the spectrum when it comes to receiving gifts. Have you ever noticed this? When a child opens a gift, and usually they're pretty good about whatever it is, it's like, awesome, thank you so much, I love this, it's so great. Are there more gifts? Can I have another present? Right? And they get a little disappointed when there aren't. They have no problem receiving. And then the kids will be like, that box at the bank, that thing that says ATM, that's magic. It just gives you more money, and we can keep taking, and we can keep getting, and we can keep receiving. They have no problem. An adult, this is how they open a gift. Oh, you shouldn't have. Because what's an adult thinking? Now I got to get you a gift. And how much did this cost? Because now I got to get you a gift, and it's got to cost the same thing, right? And then you open it, and if it's a really nice gift, what do we say? Oh, this is too much. We have such a hard time receiving. It's terrible. All right? Think about the last time you gave an adult friend a gift. They probably said thank you because that's polite, but they had a really hard time receiving it. So Jesus says, you need to receive like a child, because this inheritance, this place, this thing, this reality called the kingdom, that's a pretty big gift. And you can't earn it. And you won't deserve it. So be like a child and just receive it. But we have trouble with that because the older we get more of other things, namely disappointment. If you were to put this on a bar graph, every year older we get, our disappointment gets higher and higher, right? The gap between our expectations and our experience widens. And so it's hard to trust. It's hard to just receive because we're suspicious of everything. There must be an ulterior motive. There must be a catch. There must be a cost. In the same way, the older we get, the more unexpected everything is. We come up with plans and God says, oh, really? Right? Things don't go the way that they're supposed to. And so it just seems like we can't just take, because that wasn't part of the plan, if you're going to surprise me with a gift, it can't just be what it is. Because we've just experienced too much disappointment, too much experience, or too much unexpected. So what happens then is the older we get, the less trust we have in everything. Just think about this. You are less trusting today than you were yesterday. Jump back to yourself 10 years ago. How cynical have you become? How skeptical have you become? How squinty-eyed have you become? Instead of eyes wide open in wonder like a kid. Growing up is not all it's cracked up to be. My wife just put a framed picture in our bathroom, and I love it. It says, "Don't grow up, it's a trap." Because life isn't what it was when we were kids. And I think it's because we lose the ability to trust like a kid does. And so Jesus kind of wraps this up in a really pointed way. Verse 16. Then he took the children in his arms and placed his hands on their heads and blessed them. Every time I read that, I get a little bit emotional because it's so sweet. And it's very intimate, and it's borderline vulnerable. And I wonder what it would have been like. Can you imagine to have Jesus take you in his arms and put his hands on you? And make no mistake, Jesus, I believe, was a pretty strong guy physically. And here's why I've known that. Not long ago, I got to go to Israel. And yes, everything goes back to Israel for me these days. And we talk about Jesus' father, earthly father, Joseph, as a carpenter. Here's reality. In Jerusalem and in Israel, they don't make things out of wood. They make everything out of limestone. That's why when you look at pictures of Jerusalem, it's mostly white buildings, because everything's made out of that material. So when they would go to make something, they'd be carrying around big blocks of stone. And if Jesus, we don't know for sure that he took up the family business, but odds are, at least when he was young, he was helping dad. And so he was hauling stuff around. And so when he picks up these kids, what do you think they felt? Safe, secure, at ease. I think this moment was probably pretty different from the experience of a mall Santa Claus. Like, we don't read that the kids were freaked out and screaming and crying for mom and dad and trying to get away from Jesus. I mean, the sense you get is that Jesus was able to pull them up onto his lap, put his hands on their head, and they were okay with that. Why? Because they're kids, and they have faith like kids. And when Jesus puts his hand on their head, think about this, it says he blessed them. We don't know for sure what he said. We don't know for sure if he was praying or whatever it was that he did right here. They have no idea what's going on. I just imagine my 5-year-old son. I mean, he's sitting on Jesus' lap. Jesus is blessing him on his head. And Sawyer is probably going, is there a snack after this? He has no idea. But that's okay. He doesn't understand, but that's okay. Because kids know how to live hand in hand even when they don't understand. And what does it look like for you and I to live hand in hand with Jesus even when we don't understand? Even when we haven't done the math yet? Even when we haven't had the experience to validate the acceptance? What does it look like for us to trust him at such a deep and profound level that he's able to take us in his arms and guide us along into a blessing that we don't know, that we don't see, that we don't understand, but we trust the best comes from him? Now, I get it because I live it. This is all well and good until you walk into the chaos of your office tomorrow. This is all well and good until you get home and the kids go crazy for the 5th day in a row. This is all well and good until you eat dinner at home by yourself in front of the TV again. This is all well and good until the depression seeps in again. So the question becomes, how do we go about trusting Jesus? Like practically, because this is not going to be a light switch moment, right? You and I don't get to sit here today and go, and now I trust God with everything. It doesn't work that way. I learned how this works first at the swimming pool with my kids, but then I had this unbelievable experience with a wild animal in Breckenridge, Colorado. One of our students was going on a long-term missions trip to China, and he was going for training in Colorado, and because I was his youth pastor and he was just nice, he invited me to come with him. And so we went out for a walk one day, and it was the middle of winter. There were like feet of snow, but what's cool about Colorado is it's not super cold or wet, and we're walking around in the snow, and off in the distance, I see a fox. And what was so weird to me is that the fox was kind of looking at us, and it didn't run away, which probably meant it was sick, but I wasn't worried about that. And then I realized in my backpack I had a granola bar. So it goes through my head, how cool would it be to feed this fox? So here's what I did. I realized that if I just started taking pieces of this off and throwing it at that fox violently, because it was far away, it was going to run. So the first thing that went through my head is, it has to know that I'll come down to its level. Because look at me. If you're a tiny little fox, I might as well be a grizzly bear. So I sat down right in the middle of the street. It was off to the side, and I sat down like this, and I'm looking at this fox off in the distance, and I took one little piece, and I threw it out right in front of the fox. And it ate it and liked it. So I took another piece and I threw it just a little bit shorter. And it took 2 steps to get to that piece. And a little bit shorter, and a little bit shorter, and over again, I'm just giving these pieces to this fox, and it's coming closer and closer. And on the inside, I'm going, I hope it doesn't bite me. On the outside, I'm going, Tyler, I hope you got your camera ready, because this is going to be awesome. And it gets closer, and it gets closer, and I'm not making this up. About 5 minutes later, it took time, and it took patience. I was feeding the fox right out of my hand. I didn't pet it, but it was eating right out of my hand. And I sat there and I asked the question, what does that fox say? But I know what it thought. I think it thought things like, he's good. Whoever that one is that's tossing me my dinner, he's good. And a few steps in, I think it realized and thought, he's honest. This isn't a trap. This isn't a joke. He's honest. And then I think it finally said, he's consistent. He continues to feed me every step I take, little by little, further and further. He's consistent. And then, given how long it took, the fox had to be thinking, he's patient. because he's waiting. I'm not moving very fast because it's hard to trust. It's hard to accept. It's hard to believe. But he's patient. And he took one step at a time. And here's what that story reminded me of. That's how God is. If you and I were willing to just take a step and then another step as he feeds us and he guides us and he directs us, I think you and I would realize he's good. And we would realize that he's honest and he's consistent and he is patient. He has everything that we need in who he is. But the reality is he can have all that stuff and we can say things like he is trustworthy, but when it comes down to it, trustworthiness requires trust. Hear what I mean? Trustworthiness requires that I trust first. I will never know if he's trustworthy unless I trust first. I will never know that he can catch me in the water unless I jump first. Because acceptance is what drives, what starts, what initiates experience. And what's so incredible about God is that that experience will validate. The fox learned his trust was well-founded. I never harmed him. I never hurt him. I just fed him. If the fox had a hand, it learned to live hand in hand, even though he didn't understand. I'm talking to him. He doesn't know what I'm saying. Probably never had an organic farm vanilla chip granola bar. But he knew it was good. You see, you and I sometimes think the key to thriving in life is that it's real complicated. And if we could figure out the code, if we could crack the code that is that thriving life, then we get to experience it. But I'm here this morning to tell you it's way more simple than that. That it really boils down to the place that the entire thing hinges on is trust. Trusting God. And what you and I have to do is we just have to trust him a little bit. Like I said, it's not a light switch. And I don't pretend for 1 minute that by 1 p.m. you will have exhibited a lack of trust in God. I will. I'll do it by 10:05. So what does it look like for you to give God just a little bit? I'm talking real little bit. Simple things like, do you trust him enough to read for 5 minutes from the scriptures? And do you trust him enough to actually show you something and teach you something in it? That's little. That's simple. No one will ever even know that you did it. Do you trust him enough to volunteer, whether it's here or somewhere else, and that actually helps you grow to be like him? Do you trust him with that? Do you trust him to give you enough today? And I think what will happen over time is just like with the fox, just like with my kids, he gives you a little bit more and you start to realize, okay, my trust has been validated. My acceptance has been validated. Now I can give him more. Don't start with big, huge stuff today. Please don't. Like, don't go home and say, all right, God, I'm going to trust you with my job. I'm quitting. Like that, don't start there. Not because God can't do something incredible in that. Just start with something simple. Start with something small and work your way towards those big things that you have reservations about trusting him with. And here's what happens when the less we trust God, the more disconnected we are from God, and we live in survival mode. Because when you don't have someone to hold on to that you really believe in, it's just about staying afloat, isn't it? That's all my kids could do. If I wasn't in the water, it's just about get back up for air and stay alive. That's how we live. If that fox hadn't trusted me, it would have run as far and as fast as it possibly could because it had to survive. But when we trust God, everything starts to come together. and we are made whole, and we get to thrive. Not because we've got a lot, not because we never have problems, not because we don't have good or bad things ever happen in our life, but because our God is good. And we can thrive in him. So I'm super practical, and I just have to retrain my brain over and over again. We all have to do that, right? And studies have shown we can actually retrain our brain and rewire it. So this is what we're going to do, just to help you remember this. And this is going to be a little bit cheesy, but sometimes cheesy is awesome. So I need you to trust me that cheesy's awesome this week. And underneath the seat on the ends of the aisle is a Sharpie marker. And here's what I want you to do this week. I want you, and we're going to have to pass those down and share. I want you to open your hand, whatever hand you don't write with, because you're going to need to write. And just on the palm of your hand, I want you to write the word trust. Just trust. You can write it really small, you can write it really big, and I know this is like middle school stuff, but this is from experience. When I do something like that, I see it often. So write that word trust, and here's what you're going to do. When something comes up in your day, or you begin to have an experience like all the previous experiences where it's shaky ground and you're not sure what to do and you don't know how this is going to work out, this is what I want you to do. I want you to look at the word trust on your palm and do this. Hold it. Hold the word trust. As if you were holding the hand of Jesus himself. It's going to be a reminder, okay, I don't know what to do. I don't know how this is going to work out. I'm scared because I'm standing on the edge of a big decision or a big event. I'm going to hold on to Jesus. I'm going to trust him. And here's where this idea comes from. Again, back to my kids. When we're walking through a parking lot of any store, it never fails. My youngest, because he's not too cool for it yet, will reflexively reach up and grab my hand. And when he grabs my hand, it's two things happening. Number one, he's expressing his need for me. One, I need you, Dad. And two, he's experiencing the blessing of a trustworthy father. Because when we're in the parking lot and he doesn't have my hand, he's in survival mode. Look out for well, he's not really, but I hope he is. Look out for the cars. Look out for the cart. Look out for the people. Look before I cross. All of these kinds of things. I just got to stay alive and get in there because he promised me a candy bar today and all that kind of stuff. And what happens, though, when he grabs onto my hand, he becomes dangerous. He becomes dangerous because he knows that I will save him. He knows that I will protect him. He knows that he can't go too far, that I won't be right there. He knows that I'm with him every step of the way because he trusts me and he's learned that I am trustworthy. And here's what I believe. If you begin to trust God in the same way that a child trusts his parent, you will become dangerous. You will get to see your faith come alive and actually make a difference, not only in your own life, but in the lives around you. I'm so starved for a Christian movement, for a church to come alive that doesn't put a dent in a community, but literally turns it upside down and changes it. But that will not happen until God's children trust him. Until we're willing to be taken up into his lap, and even though we don't understand, we live hand in hand with him every single day. We become dangerous when we trust him. We're playing it safe when we lean into our own strength and ultimately leading a very limited life. But God will carry us outside the box and let us be a part of something bigger than ourselves. He will allow us to live a thriving life. Let's pray. God, we want so badly to trust you. We want so badly to live hand in hand with you, but we don't understand. We grew up, and it is so difficult for us to fathom believing in something that we can't experience first, investing in something that we don't know what the return will be like. Lord, today we want to rediscover our childhood and the simple faith that came with it. And for some of us, God, we never experienced that faith. It was just we were living life, and today we've kind of been confronted with it, and I pray that you would impress on those hearts that a childlike faith is all it takes and that it is available to them. And for us seasoned Christians that have been walking with you a long time, renew the wonder in our hearts that comes with a hand in your hand. Lord, we want to thrive in our life, and we realize today that it starts with trusting you. So help us. Give us your hand. Amen. We're going to learn a new song together, and I love this song. And here's why I love it, because the words are words that come with a little hand grabbing the hand of the Father. The words of it are the words that run through that kind of relationship that are full of trust. And no matter what comes our way, no matter what surrounds us, we can stand firm. We can believe. We can accept. Because he is who he says he is. And he loves us. So I want to encourage you to listen. But then as you get it, I want you to sing it. And maybe use the words to remind yourself of the incredible promise, the incredible Father that you have.